The child shouldn't have been alive, not after 2 winters alone in a town where even grown men didn't survive. But there she was, thin as a rail, singing to a stray dog behind a boarded storefront, her voice carrying across the empty street like a ghost's prayer. Caleb Rowe had ridden into 100 dying towns, always kept riding, but something in that song stopped him cold. Maybe it was the hope in it. Maybe it was the way she looked at him, not with fear but recognition, like she'd been waiting, like she knew he was supposed to find her. Welcome to this story. If it moves you, please leave a like and comment with your city so I can see how far Lydia and Caleb's journey travels. Now, let their story begin. The Arizona Territory didn't forgive mistakes. Caleb Rowe had learned that truth the hard way, carved it into his bones over 7 years of drifting through high desert and scrubland, taking work where he found it and moving on before anyone asked questions he couldn't answer. He was 32 and felt 60, his hands scarred from rope and leather, his face weathered to the color of old saddle. The black gelding beneath him was the only constant in his life, bought with the last good wages he'd earned before everything fell apart. Sunset bled across the horizon as he rode into Cedar Bluff, another town he'd never heard of, one more place to spend a night before the restlessness drove him onward. The main street was nearly empty, half the storefronts shuttered, windows dark. A few oil lamps flickered in the saloon. Somewhere a dog barked, the sound thin and desperate. Caleb guided his horse toward the livery stable, his body moving with the tired familiarity of a man who'd done this dance too many times. The stable owner, an old man with rheumy eyes and tobacco-stained teeth, took his 2 bits and asked no questions. That suited Caleb fine. He was turning toward the saloon, thinking about whiskey and a corner table where he could sit with his back to the wall, when he heard it. Singing. Soft at first, almost lost beneath the evening wind. A child's voice, clear and steady, carrying a tune he didn't recognize. It wasn't coming from any of the lit buildings. Caleb stopped, his hand instinctively moving to the knife at his belt. Not from threat, but from pure confusion. Children didn't survive alone in towns like this. The singing continued, rising and falling like water over stones. Caleb followed the sound down a narrow alley between the general store and what looked like an abandoned milliner's shop. Trash littered the packed earth. Broken crates, torn fabric, a rusted bucket. The smell of old smoke hung in the air. Behind the milliner's, in a space barely wider than a wagon bed, he found her. The girl couldn't have been more than 10 or 11, though malnutrition made it hard to tell. She sat cross-legged on a folded piece of canvas, her dress patched so many times the original fabric was a mystery. Dark hair hung in a single braid down her back, neat despite everything else. She was singing to a dog, a yellow mutt so thin its ribs stood out like barrel staves, its coat matted and dull. The dog's head rested in her lap. She stroked its ears with one hand while she sang, her voice never wavering. Caleb stood there 15 feet away, watching something that shouldn't exist. The girl had to know he was there. His boots had scraped loud enough on the gravel. But she didn't stop singing, didn't look up, just kept stroking that dying dog like it was the most important thing in the world. When the song ended, she finally raised her head. Her eyes were gray, the color of winter rain. They studied him without fear, without surprise, with a calm that belonged to someone much older. She didn't smile, didn't speak, just looked at him like she was measuring something, deciding something. "That's a good song," Caleb said finally, because somebody had to break the silence, and it damn sure wasn't going to be her. "My mother taught it to me." Her voice was quiet but clear, each word distinct. No trembling, no hesitation. "Where is she now?" "Gone." The girl went back to petting the dog. 2 years ago. Almost 2 years. Caleb felt something cold settle in his chest. He'd seen enough of the territory to know what "gone" meant. Cholera, accident, childbirth, violence. The frontier offered 1,000 ways to die, and most of them were quick. "Your father?" "Gone with her. Same night." "You got family? Anybody looking after you?" "There was an aunt. She died last winter." The girl said it like she was reciting a grocery list, flat and factual. Then she looked up at him again, those rain-colored eyes steady. "I take care of myself now." Caleb crouched down, making himself smaller, less threatening. The movement was instinctive, something left over from the man he used to be before grief had hollowed him out. What's your name? Lydia. Lydia Hale. I'm Caleb. He nodded toward the dog. Your dog? No, he's a stray, like me, I guess. She stroked the animal's head. He's sick. Hasn't eaten in days. I've been singing to him so he knows he's not alone. The words hit Caleb harder than they should have. He looked at this slip of a girl, this child who should have been dead or desperate or mad with fear, sitting in an alley singing to a dying dog. Not crying, not begging, just singing, because that was what you did when someone was alone. You hungry? He heard himself ask. Lydia studied him again, that unsettling calm in her expression. Yes. You know where the boarding house is? Mrs. Garrett's place, 2 streets over. I'm staying there tonight. They serve supper at 7. You come by, I'll buy you a plate. Why? The question was so direct it caught him off balance. Because you're a kid and you're hungry. You don't know me. Don't have to. Lydia was quiet for a long moment, her hand still moving over the dog's head in slow, gentle circles. The animal's breathing was shallow, labored. It wouldn't last the night. She had to know that, but she didn't stop touching it. If I come, she said finally, I'll work for it. I don't take charity. Work how? I can scrub floors, wash dishes, mend clothes. I'm good with a needle. Caleb wanted to tell her she didn't have to earn a goddamn meal, that feeding a hungry child wasn't charity, it was basic human decency. But he recognized the steel in her voice, the pride that was maybe the only thing keeping her spine straight. So instead he just nodded. All right, you can wash my shirt. Got trail dust all over it. Deal. Lydia stood up in one fluid motion, leaving the dog on the canvas. The animal whimpered once, a thin sound of abandonment. You're leaving him? He's dying. I can't fix that. She looked down at the dog, and for the first time Caleb saw something break in her expression. Just a flicker, gone as fast as it came. But I sat with him. That matters. She walked past Caleb without another word, her bare feet silent on the packed earth. He followed, glancing back once at the dog. Its eyes were closed now. Maybe it was already gone. Mrs. Garrett's boarding house was exactly what Caleb expected. Worn but clean, smelling of lye soap and boiled meat. The landlady was a stout woman with iron-gray hair and suspicious eyes that softened only slightly when she saw Lydia trailing behind him. Child's been living rough, Mrs. Garrett said, not quite a question. She's had supper? Caleb asked. Not here. Not regular, anyway. The woman's mouth pressed into a hard line. Nobody's looking after her proper. She is now, Caleb said, and meant it for tonight, at least. Tomorrow, he'd be gone. Tomorrow didn't matter. They ate at a corner table, beef stew thick with potatoes and carrots, bread so fresh it steamed when Lydia tore into it. She ate like she'd been taught manners once, using her spoon properly, chewing with her mouth closed, but the speed gave her away. She was starving. Caleb ate slower, watching her. How long you been on your own? Since my aunt died. February. 8 months. 8 months of a child surviving alone in a dying town. Where you been sleeping? Different places. The old church sometimes. The mill when it's cold. You got belongings? Some. I keep them hid. Smart. He tore off a piece of bread. You got a plan? For after? Lydia looked up from her bowl. After what? After tonight. Tomorrow. Next week. Same as always. Find food. Stay safe. Keep looking. Looking for what? Her spoon stopped halfway to her mouth. She set it down carefully. Proof. Of what? That my parents are really gone. Her voice didn't waver, but her hands had started to shake. She pressed them flat against the table. Everyone says they're dead, but nobody found them. Nobody buried them. They just disappeared. One night they were there, next morning they weren't. If I could just find something, a grave, a marker, anything, then I'd know. Then I could stop. Caleb felt that cold thing in his chest spread, freezing the spaces between his ribs. He knew what she was doing. He'd done it himself in the months after he lost Mary and Samuel. The searching, the desperate hope that maybe, somehow, the worst hadn't happened, that there was a mistake, an explanation, a way to rewrite the ending. There wasn't. There never was. But you couldn't tell someone that. They had to learn it on their own, in their own time, in their own blood. And if you find out they're gone, he asked quietly, what then? Lydia looked at him with those gray eyes, and suddenly she wasn't a child anymore. She was something older, something that had survived things children shouldn't survive. Then I'll know, she said simply. And knowing is better than wondering. Caleb paid for a second room that night, told Mrs. Garrett it was for his niece visiting from Phoenix. The landlady didn't believe him. He could see it in her face. But she took his money and gave Lydia a key and a clean towel without comment. The girl stood in the hallway holding that key like it was made of gold. Bath's down the hall, Caleb said. Mrs. Garrett heats water till 9. Tomorrow morning there's breakfast. Porridge and eggs. What time are you leaving? Lydia asked. The question shouldn't have surprised him, but it did. Early, before sunrise, probably. She nodded, accepting this. Thank you for the supper and the room. You're welcome. Lydia turned toward her door, then stopped. Mr. Rowe? Just Caleb. Caleb. She looked back at him, and there was something fierce in her expression now, something that burned despite the calm. I won't forget this. When I'm grown, when I have something to give, I'll find you. I'll pay you back. You don't owe me anything. Yes, I do. She said it with such certainty that Caleb couldn't argue. And I pay my debts. She went into her room and closed the door softly. Caleb stood in the hallway, listening to the small sounds of her moving around. The creak of the bed frame, the rustle of fabric, the soft pad of bare feet on wood. After a while, the sounds stopped. He went to his own room, lay on the bed fully dressed, boots still on, staring at the ceiling. The restlessness was already building in his chest, that familiar itch to move, to ride, to put distance between himself and anything that felt like staying. He'd be gone in 6 hours. This town would be a memory by noon tomorrow. Except there was a child sleeping one room over who'd been alone for 8 months, who sang to dying dogs, who believed in debts and dignity and the possibility of finding answers in a territory that buried its dead in unmarked graves. Caleb closed his eyes, willing sleep to come. It didn't. He was in the stable before dawn, saddling his horse by lamplight, when he heard footsteps behind him. Lydia stood in the stable doorway, wearing the same patched dress from yesterday. She'd braided her hair again, neat and tight. In her hand she held his shirt, washed and folded. You're early, Caleb said. So are you. She walked forward and held out the shirt. I washed it in the creek before sunrise. It's still a little damp. He took it. The fabric was clean, the collar scrubbed until the stains were gone. She'd done the work exactly as promised. Thank you. You're welcome. They stood there in the pre-dawn quiet, the horse shifting its weight behind Caleb, hay rustling under its hooves. Lydia didn't ask him to stay, didn't cry or cling or beg, just stood there with that unnerving calm, watching him prepare to leave. You got food for today? Caleb asked, because he had to say something. I'll find something. Mrs. Garrett might give you work. Kitchen work, laundry. Maybe. Caleb swung up into the saddle. The leather creaked under his weight. The horse snorted, eager to move. He should go. Right now. Just turn the animal toward the street and ride. Instead, he looked down at Lydia. You really think you'll find them? Your parents? I'll find something, she said. Eventually. And then what? She was quiet for a long moment. Then, so softly he almost missed it. Then I'll decide what comes next. Caleb thought about Mary's grave, unmarked because he hadn't been able to afford a stone. Thought about Samuel's tiny body wrapped in a quilt, buried on a hillside he couldn't remember how to find anymore. Thought about 2 years of drifting, running, trying to outride ghosts. He thought about a girl singing to a dying dog so it wouldn't be alone. Tell you what, he heard himself say, I'll be back through this way in a month, maybe 6 weeks. If you're still here, if you still need help looking, I'll help you look. One day. The month stretched long and empty. Caleb took work where he found it. A week repairing fence line outside Prescott, 3 days helping move cattle near Flagstaff, Odd jobs in mining camps where men asked no questions and expected no conversation. He told himself he was just drifting, following the pattern he'd held for years. Told himself Cedar Bluff was just another town, Lydia Hale just another stranger. But at night, in whatever bunkhouse or tent or open ground he laid his bedroll, he thought about gray eyes and a voice singing something hopeful to something dying. 6 weeks after he left, he turned his horse back east. Cedar Bluff looked the same, still dying, still half empty, still clinging to existence out of stubbornness rather than sense. Caleb rode in at midday, the sun hard and white overhead. He went straight to Mrs. Garrett's. The landlady was sweeping the front porch. She looked up as he approached, and something almost like satisfaction crossed her face. "Wondered if you'd come back," she said. "The girl, Lydia, she still around?" "She is." Mrs. Garrett set her broom aside. "Been working for me. Cleaning rooms, helping with laundry. She's a hard worker. Too thin still, but she eats regular now." Relief and something else, something he didn't want to name, flooded through Caleb. "She here now?" "Out back." "Hanging sheets?" He found her in the yard behind the boarding house, standing on a crate so she could reach the clothesline. White sheets billowed in the wind, snapping like sails. She'd just pinned one when she saw him. For a moment they just looked at each other across the yard, man and child, stranger and stranger, two people who'd made a promise neither had expected the other to keep. Then Lydia stepped down from the crate. "You came back." "Said I would." "People say lots of things." "I'm not people." The corner of her mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. "No, I guess you're not." Caleb walked forward, stopping a few feet away. "You still looking?" "Every day. I ask questions, check with the sheriff, the undertaker, anyone who might know something. Nobody has answers." "You ready to look harder?" She studied him, and he could see her thinking, calculating, trying to understand why a drifter would come back for a child who wasn't his. Finally, she just nodded. "Yes." "All right then. Tomorrow morning, we'll ride out to where they disappeared. You remember the place?" "I remember everything." He believed her. Mad. That night, Caleb paid for 2 rooms again. Bought Lydia supper again, chicken and dumplings this time, with apple pie after. She ate slower now, not starving anymore, but still careful, like someone who'd learned the value of every bite. "Why'd you come back?" she asked, when they'd finished eating. Caleb pushed his empty plate aside. "Don't rightly know." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I got." Lydia folded her hands on the table, her expression serious. "Mrs. Garrett says you're running from something, says I shouldn't trust you." "She's probably right. But I do anyway. Trust you, I mean." She said it matter-of-factly, like she was commenting on the weather. "I don't know why. I just do." That cold thing in Caleb's chest cracked a little, not much, just enough to hurt. "Maybe you shouldn't." "Maybe." She stood up. "But I'm going with you tomorrow anyway." She left him sitting there, went upstairs to her room. Caleb stayed at the table, listening to the boarding house settle into nighttime quiet. Footsteps overhead, a door closing, someone coughing. He'd made a mistake coming back. He could feel it, the way you could feel a storm building before the first clouds appeared. Getting involved, making promises, letting this girl's hope become something that mattered to him. It was all wrong. He should leave tonight, disappear. Let her learn what everyone learned eventually. People left. People broke promises. Trust was just another word for future disappointment. But when morning came, he was still there. Mustn't. They rode out just after sunrise, Lydia sitting behind Caleb on the black gelding. She directed him east toward a stretch of low hills where the desert gave way to rocky terrain studded with juniper and pinon. The morning air was cold, sharp enough to sting. "It was out here," Lydia said when they'd ridden about 5 miles. "There was a camp. Prospectors, I think. My parents went out to trade. We had vegetables. My mother could grow anything. They said they'd be back by dark." Caleb slowed the horse. "And?" "They didn't come back. Next morning I went looking, found the camp empty, burned out. Everything gone. Tents, equipment, people, just ashes and some broken tools." Show me. She guided him through the hills, her voice steady as she pointed out landmarks. A distinctive rock formation, a dry wash, a lightning-struck tree. Finally, they came to a small clearing ringed by jumbled boulders. Caleb dismounted, helping Lydia down. The remains of the camp were still visible. A fire pit gone cold years ago, rusted metal, scraps of canvas so weathered they fell apart when he touched them. No bones, no bodies, no graves. He walked the perimeter slowly, reading the ground the way he'd been taught, looking for signs, patterns, anything that told a story. Lydia watched him work, not speaking, just waiting. After 20 minutes, Caleb straightened. Looks like they left in a hurry. Took most everything. Fire wasn't an accident. Somebody set it deliberately. Trying to cover tracks, maybe. Cover what? Can't say for sure. Could be they struck something valuable and didn't want word getting out. Could be they had trouble with natives or other prospectors. Could be a dozen things. But my parents? Caleb looked at this girl who'd survived 2 years on hope and determination, and he didn't want to say what he knew she needed to hear. But lying would be crueler. If they were here when this happened, Lydia, they didn't leave walking. You understand? She nodded slowly. You think they're dead? I think whatever happened here was bad. I think if they were alive, they'd have found a way back to you. Parents don't abandon their children, not if they can help it. Lydia walked to the edge of the clearing and stood looking out over the hills. Caleb stayed where he was, giving her space. The wind moved through the juniper, carrying the smell of sage and dust. When she finally spoke, her voice was small but steady. I knew. I think I always knew, but I had to try. I know. What do I do now? And there it was. The question Caleb had been dreading, the one he had no good answer for. What did a child do when she finally stopped running from the truth? When hope ran out and reality settled in like winter cold? He should tell her to go back to town, find someone to take her in properly. There were families, surely, churches, decent people who'd care for an orphan. Instead, he heard himself say, "You come with me." Lydia turned around. What? For now, until we figure something better. The words kept coming, like something had broken loose inside him. I've got some money saved. Not much, but enough. I can keep us fed, keep us moving. You're smart, you're tough, you won't be dead weight. And maybe it's time I stopped running alone. She stared at him, and for the first time since he'd met her, there was something raw and unguarded in her expression. Disbelief. Fear. And underneath it all, a desperate, fragile hope. You mean it? Her voice cracked on the words. You're not just saying it because you feel sorry for me? I feel sorry for you, Caleb said honestly. But that's not why I'm asking. I'm asking because I came back. Because you trusted me when you shouldn't have. Because you washed my shirt and kept your promise and sat with a dying dog so it wouldn't be alone. He paused, trying to find words for something he barely understood himself. I'm asking because maybe we both need this. Lydia walked back across the clearing. She stopped right in front of him, looking up, searching his face for lies or doubt or false promises. He looked back, letting her see whatever was there. I'm not easy, she said finally. Mrs. Garrett says I'm stubborn. I ask too many questions. I don't know when to quit. Good, neither do I. I'll work, I won't be a burden. I know. And someday, when I'm grown, I'll pay you back. For everything. You don't have to. Yes, I do. That steel was back in her voice, that pride that had kept her alive. So you'd better remember that. This is a debt, Mr. Rowe. I'll honor it. Caleb almost smiled. Almost. All right then. We've got a deal. He held out his hand. Lydia looked at it, then grasped it firmly. Her hand was small and calloused, strong for a child's. They shook once, solemnly, like partners entering a contract. Then, before Caleb could say anything else, Lydia stepped forward and wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing her face against his chest. She didn't cry, didn't make a sound, just held on. Caleb stood frozen, his arms awkward at his sides, having no idea what to do. He couldn't remember the last time someone had hugged him. Couldn't remember the last time he'd let anyone close enough to try. Slowly, carefully, he brought his hands up and rested them on her back. She was so small, so impossibly small. "Thank you," she whispered against his shirt. "Thank you for coming back." Caleb closed his eyes. "You're welcome, kid." They stood like that for a long moment, two lost souls in a burned-out prospector's camp, holding on to something neither of them could name but both of them desperately needed. When Lydia finally stepped back, her eyes were dry but bright. She looked at the clearing one last time, her jaw set. "I'm ready to go." "You sure?" "Yes." She walked to the horse. "They're gone. I can't change that, but I can keep living. That's what they'd want." Caleb followed, marveling at her. This child who'd survived everything the territory could throw at her and was still standing, still hoping, still ready to move forward. He lifted her onto the saddle, then swung up behind her. The horse shifted, sensing the subtle change in weight, the shift from temporary to something more lasting. "Where are we going?" Lydia asked as they started back toward town. Caleb thought about it, about the jobs he'd been drifting toward, the places he'd been running from. None of it seemed right anymore. None of it seemed enough. "I heard there's ranch work up near Prescott," he said finally. "Real work, not just day labor. They might have a bunkhouse. Steady pay." "That sounds good." "Means staying put for a while. You all right with that?" Lydia was quiet, and when she spoke again, her voice was different, stronger, clearer, like she'd found something she'd been searching for all along. "I've been moving for 2 years, looking for ghosts. I think I'm ready to stop, ready to build something instead." Caleb felt that crack in his chest widen a little more. Not breaking, exactly. Opening. Letting light in. "Then that's what we'll do," he said. They rode back to Cedar Bluff in comfortable silence, the sun climbing higher, warming the air. Tomorrow they'd pack up, say goodbye to Mrs. Garrett, head north toward whatever came next. But tonight they'd have supper at the boarding house. Tonight they'd sleep under a solid roof. Tonight, for the first time in a long time, neither of them would be alone. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start with. They left Cedar Bluff 3 days later, early enough that the streets were still empty and the sky held that deep purple color that came just before dawn. Mrs. Garrett had packed them food, bread, dried meat, apples wrapped carefully in cloth, and pressed 2 silver dollars into Lydia's hand despite the girl's protests. "For emergencies," the landlady said firmly, "and you write to me, child. Let me know you're safe." Lydia promised, though both she and Caleb knew she probably wouldn't. The frontier didn't make room for letters and promises. You survived or you didn't. Everything else was decoration. The ride north took 4 days. They traveled slow, stopping often to rest the horse and let Lydia stretch her legs. She wasn't used to riding long distances, and by the second day Caleb could see the exhaustion in the way she held herself, stiff and careful. But she never complained, never asked to stop, just gritted her teeth and kept going, because that's what you did. At night they made camp in whatever shelter they could find, a rock overhang, a stand of cottonwoods, once an abandoned line shack with half a roof still intact. Caleb taught her how to build a fire that didn't smoke, how to read the stars for direction, how to listen to the night sounds, and know which ones mattered. She absorbed everything with an intensity that reminded him of himself at that age, before life had beaten the curiosity out of him. "Why'd you stop ranching?" she asked on the 3rd night, as they sat by the fire eating beans and hardtack. "Mrs. Garrett said you used to work steady, before." Caleb poked at the fire with a stick, watching sparks spiral up into darkness. He'd known this question would come eventually. "I had a family once, a wife, a son." "What happened?" "Fever. Swept through the valley where we were living. Took them both in less than a week." He said it flatly, without emotion, the way he'd learned to say it so it didn't tear him apart every time. "Buried them on a Tuesday, left on Wednesday, been moving ever since." Lydia was quiet for a long time, then softly, "How old was your son?" 4. "That's young." "Too young." Caleb threw the stick into the fire. "His name was Samuel. He liked horses, wanted to learn to ride." "I'm sorry." "Me too." He looked at her across the flames. "That's why I almost didn't come back for you. Getting close to people again. It's not something I planned on doing." "But you did come back." Yeah, I did. Why? Caleb thought about all the reasons he could give: loneliness, guilt, the simple human instinct to help someone in need. But the real truth was simpler and more complicated than any of that. Because you were singing, he said finally, to that dog. You knew it was dying and you sang to it anyway. That's not something I could just walk away from. Lydia pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. The firelight caught in her gray eyes, turning them amber. My mother used to say that how you treat things that can't help you back, that's what shows who you really are. Your mother was smart. She was. Lydia's voice went distant, remembering. She could make anything grow. Even in the bad soil around Cedar Bluff, she had a garden. Tomatoes, squash, beans. People said it was impossible, but she did it anyway. She said the secret was talking to the plants, telling them they mattered. You think that really worked? I don't know, but they grew. She looked at him directly. Maybe things just need to know they matter. Maybe that's enough. Caleb felt something shift in his chest, that crack widening a little more. This girl, this strange, fierce, too-wise child, was getting under his skin in ways he hadn't thought possible anymore. He cleared his throat. You should sleep. Long day tomorrow. Will you be here when I wake up? The question shouldn't have stung, but it did. I'll be here. You promise? I promise. Lydia nodded and crawled into her bedroll. Within minutes, her breathing had evened out into sleep. Caleb sat by the fire for another hour, keeping watch, listening to the coyotes in the distance and the wind moving through the sage. He'd made a promise to a dying dog once, too. To Samuel, the night the fever had taken hold, and they both knew, though neither said it, that morning wouldn't come the way they hoped. He'd promised to take care of Mary, to keep the ranch going, to make something good out of the life they'd built. He'd broken every one of those promises. But this one, this promise to a girl who'd lost everything and was still standing, maybe this one he could keep. The next morning they reached the outskirts of Prescott. It wasn't much of a town yet, just a collection of buildings clustered around a central square, but it had that feel of a place trying to become something. The saloon was doing good business even at mid-morning. A new hotel was going up, its frame stark against the blue sky. Men moved with purpose, not the aimless drifting Caleb had seen in Cedar Bluff. You ever been to a town this big? He asked Lydia as they rode down the main street. No, Cedar Bluff was the only place I ever lived. Stick close then, easy to get lost. They asked around about ranch work and got pointed toward the Triple Bar, about 8 miles west. The foreman there, a man named Dutch Keller, was supposedly hiring for the winter. Caleb thanked the stable owner who'd given them directions and turned the horse west. The Triple Bar sprawled across a valley between two ridges of pine-covered hills. Caleb could see cattle dotting the grassland, a big house set back from the road, and several outbuildings including a long bunkhouse and a substantial barn. Smoke rose from the chimney of what looked like a cook shack. Everything spoke of money and organization. This wasn't some hard-scrabble operation held together with spit and prayer. They found Dutch Keller in the barn, working on a saddle that had seen better days. He was a big man gone leaner with age, his face weathered to leather, his hands thick and scarred. When he looked up at Caleb's approach, his eyes were sharp and assessing. Help you? Looking for work. Heard you might be hiring. Dutch's gaze moved from Caleb to Lydia and back again. You any good with horses? Good enough. Cattle? Worked herds in Texas before I came west. Why'd you leave? Personal reasons. Dutch grunted. Fair enough. Most men out here are running from something. He set down his tools. I could use another hand through winter. Pays $30 a month, plus food and a bunk. Works hard. We've got fences to mend, cattle to tend, and about 100 other jobs that need doing before snow hits. Sounds fair. The girl yours? Caleb hesitated just a fraction too long. She is now. She work? She does, Lydia said, speaking up for herself. I can clean, cook, mend, tend animals. I'm strong for my size and I learn fast. Dutch studied her with the same sharp assessment he'd given Caleb. How old are you? 11, almost 12. And you got people? Besides him? No, sir. Just us. The foreman was quiet for a moment, chewing on something, probably not tobacco since Caleb didn't see him spit. Finally, he nodded. My wife, Rosa, runs the house. She could probably use help in the kitchen, especially with the hands coming in hungry all winter. You work for her, you earn your keep, $5 a month. That agreeable?" Lydia's eyes went wide. $5? That's what I said. Yes, sir. That's more than agreeable. All right then. Dutch turned back to Caleb. You start tomorrow. Bunkhouse is the long building past the barn. Pick any empty bunk. Supper's at 6 in the cook shack. Don't be late. Cookie gets mean when people waste her food. He paused. The girl sleeps in the house. Rosa will fix her up with a room. She stays with me, Caleb said, the words coming out harder than he meant them to. No offense, mister, but a girl her age sleeping in a bunkhouse full of ranch hands ain't proper. Rosa will look after her. You can see her every day, eat meals together if you want. But she sleeps in the house where it's safe and respectable. Every instinct in Caleb wanted to argue, to insist, to keep Lydia close where he could protect her. But Dutch was right. The bunkhouse was no place for a child. And if he pushed too hard, made too much fuss, it would raise questions he didn't want to answer. He looked at Lydia. She looked back, steady and calm. It's all right, she said quietly. I'll be fine. You sure? I'm sure. Caleb turned back to Dutch. All right, but anything happens to her, anything at all, nothing's going to happen to her. Rosa's good people, and so am I. We don't tolerate trouble on this ranch. Dutch's voice had gone hard. You got concerns about that. You can ride out now. For a long moment, the two men stared at each other, weighing, measuring. Finally, Caleb nodded. We'll stay. Good. Now get your horse settled and introduce the girl to Rosa. House is the big one with the green shutters. Rosa Keller turned out to be a small woman with silver-streaked black hair and hands that never stopped moving. She took one look at Lydia, thin, tired, wearing a dress that was more patches than original fabric, and her face softened into something fierce and maternal. Come with me, child. Let's get you cleaned up and fed. She swept Lydia into the house before either of them could protest. Caleb stood on the porch, feeling suddenly unmoored. For 4 days, he and Lydia had been a unit, a pair, moving together. Now she was disappearing into someone else's care, and he was supposed to just… what? Walk away? Trust strangers? But what choice did he have? He couldn't keep her with him every second, couldn't protect her from everything. At some point, he had to let her exist in the world, even if the world was dangerous and unpredictable and full of ways to get hurt. He went to the bunkhouse, chose a bunk near the door, and tried not to think about how quiet it suddenly felt. That night at supper, beef stew thick enough to stand a spoon in, cornbread dripping with butter, dried apple pie for dessert, Caleb sat at the long table with 6 other ranch hands and tried to focus on his food instead of constantly looking for Lydia. She was at the other end of the table, sitting next to Rosa, listening to the woman talk about kitchen duties and morning routines. She looked small and out of place, but not frightened, not lost. After the meal, as the men drifted back toward the bunkhouse and their evening routines, cards, whiskey, tall tales, Caleb caught Lydia outside the cook shack. You all right? He asked. I'm fine. Rosa's nice. She gave me a real bed with a quilt, and she said I can have a bath tomorrow. That's good. They stood there in the gathering dusk, neither quite ready to separate. Finally, Lydia said, You're not leaving, are you, while I'm sleeping? No, I gave you my word. I know, She looked down at her feet. I just needed to hear it again. Caleb crouched down so they were at eye level. I'm not going anywhere, you understand? I'm staying right here. You'll see me at breakfast tomorrow and every day after that. Promise? I promise. Lydia nodded, then suddenly stepped forward and hugged him again, quick and fierce. Thank you, she whispered. Then she pulled back and ran toward the house before he could respond. Caleb straightened slowly, watching her go. Behind him, he heard footsteps, Dutch, coming from the barn. She's a good kid, the foreman said, stopping beside him. Yeah. You planning to keep her? Long term, I mean? Caleb hadn't let himself think that far ahead. Hadn't let himself imagine a future that extended beyond the next day, the next week. I don't know. Haven't figured that part out yet. Well, you better figure it soon. Child needs stability, needs to know she's got a place in the world. She's got a place, with me. For how long? Until you get restless again? Until whatever you're running from catches up? Dutch's voice wasn't unkind, just matter of fact. I've seen a lot of men come through here over the years. Most of them are running. Most of them don't stop until they run out of territory or run out of time. You strike me as that type. Maybe I was. Maybe I'm trying to change. Trying's good, but that girl deserves more than trying. She deserves certain. Dutch walked away, leaving Caleb standing in the twilight, feeling the weight of those words settle on his shoulders like stones. The days fell into a rhythm. Caleb worked from dawn to dusk, mending fences, moving cattle to better grazing, breaking ice in water troughs when the first hard frost came. The work was backbreaking and endless, exactly the kind of labor that let you shut your mind off and just exist in your body. He'd forgotten how good that could feel. Lydia worked just as hard, helping Rosa in the kitchen, learning to bake bread and render lard and put up preserves. In the evenings, when the work was done, Caleb would find her in the big kitchen, and they'd sit at the scarred wooden table while she practiced her letters. He'd bought her a slate and chalk in Prescott, and she attacked her lessons with the same fierce determination she brought to everything else. "What's this word?" she asked one night, pointing to something Rosa had written out for her. "Responsibility. That's a long one. Important word, though. Means doing what you're supposed to do even when it's hard." Lydia studied the word, sounding it out slowly. Responsibility. She looked up at him. "Is that what you're doing with me?" The question caught him off guard. "What do you mean?" "Taking care of me. Is it responsibility, or is it something else?" Caleb set down the piece of leather he'd been working on. "Honestly, I'm not sure. Started as responsibility, I guess. Felt wrong to leave a kid alone. But now..." He searched for words that wouldn't sound foolish or sentimental. "Now it's more than that." "What is it?" "Family, maybe. Or the start of one, anyway." Lydia's face did something complicated, joy and fear and hope all mixed together. "You mean it?" "I wouldn't say it if I didn't." She went back to her slate, but Caleb could see the smile she was trying to hide. After a minute, she said, very quietly, "I like that. Family." "Me too, kid." Winter settled in hard and fast. Snow came in November, heavy wet flakes that piled up 2 feet deep and turned the valley into a white expanse broken only by the dark shapes of cattle and buildings. The work got harder, breaking ice twice a day, hauling hay to the herd, keeping equipment from freezing solid. Caleb fell into his bunk each night so tired he barely remembered lying down. But despite the exhaustion, despite the cold and the endless labor, he felt something shifting inside him. The restlessness that had driven him for 2 years was fading, replaced by something steadier. Routine. Purpose. The satisfaction of watching Lydia thrive. Because she was thriving. Under Rosa's care and steady meals, she'd put on weight, lost that hollow-eyed look. Her hands grew rough from work, but her smile came easier. She laughed sometimes, a sound Caleb hadn't heard in Cedar Bluff, a sound that made something warm bloom in his chest every time. One December evening, Dutch found Caleb in the barn checking on a mare who was due to foal any day. "Got something to discuss with you," the foreman said, leaning against a stall door. "What's that?" "The situation with the girl, you and her." Caleb's hand stilled on the mare's neck. "What about it?" "Rosa and I have been talking. We like the kid. She's smart, hardworking, respectful. And we can see she's attached to you, you to her." "All right. But the thing is, legally speaking, you got no claim to her. You're not her father. You're not her guardian. If the wrong person started asking questions, there could be trouble." Caleb turned to face Dutch fully. "What kind of trouble?" "The kind where some judge decides she'd be better off in an orphanage or with some family who wants free labor. Happens all the time out here. Orphans get shuffled around, put to work, treated like property." Dutch's expression was serious. "You want to keep her, really keep her. You need to make it legal." "How?" "Adoption papers. There's a lawyer in Prescott who handles that kind of thing. Costs some money, takes a few months to process, but once it's done, she's yours in the eyes of the law. Nobody can take her from you." The word adoption hit Caleb like a physical blow. He'd been thinking of Lydia as his responsibility, his companion, maybe even his family in some loose, informal way. But adoption, that was permanent. That was a promise you couldn't take back, a commitment that lasted a lifetime. That was terrifying. I don't know, he said slowly. That's a big step. It is. But from where I'm standing, you've already taken it. You're just not admitting it yet. Dutch straightened up. Think about it. Talk to the girl. But don't wait too long. Winter's hard, and you never know what spring might bring. He left Caleb alone with the pregnant mare and thoughts that wouldn't settle. That night, Caleb couldn't sleep. He lay in his bunk, listening to the wind howl outside and the other men snore, thinking about adoption papers and promises and the weight of forever. Around 2 a.m, he gave up, pulled on his coat, and walked out into the cold. The house was dark except for one window, the kitchen. Through the glass, he could see Lydia sitting at the table, wrapped in a quilt, reading by lamplight. He knocked softly. She looked up, startled, then smiled and came to open the door. Can't sleep? She asked. Something like that. You? Same. She stepped back to let him in. The kitchen was warm, the stove still radiating heat. Want some tea? Rosa showed me how to make it. Sure. They sat at the table while Lydia prepared 2 cups with the serious concentration she brought to every task. When she set his cup in front of him, Caleb wrapped his hands around it, letting the warmth seep into his fingers. Can I ask you something? He said. Always. You happy here? At the ranch, I mean? Lydia considered this carefully. Yes, I like Rosa. I like learning. I like having enough food and a warm place to sleep. But sometimes I wonder if it's real, if it'll last. She looked at him directly. You're happy too, aren't you? I can tell. You smile more now. You don't look like you're about to run away. I'm not running. Not right now. But what about later? What about when spring comes and you start feeling restless again? There it was. The fear she'd been carrying since Cedar Bluff, maybe longer. The fear that everyone left, everyone disappeared, nothing good lasted. Caleb set down his cup. Lydia, I need you to listen to me. Really listen. She nodded, her eyes wide in the lamplight. I'm not perfect. I've made a lot of mistakes, hurt people I loved because I was too scared or too stubborn to do better. When Mary and Samuel died, I ran. I ran for 2 years because it hurt too much to stay still. And part of me, a big part, is still scared, still wants to run. Then why don't you? Because of you. The words came easier than he expected. Because you stopped me singing to a dying dog. Because you trusted me when you shouldn't have. Because watching you grow and learn and thrive, that's the first thing that's made me want to stay put in longer than I can remember. Lydia's eyes were shining now, but she didn't cry. What are you saying? I'm saying I want to make this permanent, legal. There's a way to do it. Adoption papers. It would make you my daughter, officially. Mine to raise, mine to protect, mine to... His voice caught. Mine to love. The silence stretched out, punctuated only by the wind outside and the tick of the clock on the wall. Then Lydia said, so quietly he almost missed it, You want to adopt me? If you'll have me. I know I'm not your first choice. I know your real parents are gone. She said it firmly without flinching. They're gone, and I miss them every day, but they're gone. And you're here. You came back for me. You kept your promises. You're teaching me things and buying me slate and letting me work so I don't feel like charity. Her voice got stronger. So yes, I'll have you. I want you to adopt me. I want this to be real. Caleb felt something break inside his chest, but not in a painful way. In a way that let light pour in, warm and bright and terrifying. He reached across the table and took her hand. It was still small, but not as small as it used to be. Growing. All right then. We'll do it. First chance we get, we'll ride to Prescott and find that lawyer. We'll be a real family? We already are. This just makes it official. Lydia stood up and came around the table. This time when she hugged him, Caleb didn't hesitate. He wrapped his arms around her and held on tight, this fierce, brave girl who'd survived everything and was still standing, still hoping, still believing in second chances. Thank you, she whispered into his shirt. Thank you for not leaving me. Thank you for not letting me, he said back. They stayed like that for a long time, the snow falling outside, the stove crackling warm, two people who'd lost everything finding something new in each other. When Lydia finally pulled back, she was smiling, really smiling, wide and unguarded. I should probably sleep now. Rosa's going to have me up early to start breakfast. Go on then. I'll see you in the morning. Promise? Always. She headed for the door, then stopped and looked back. Caleb? Yeah? When we do the adoption, do I get to keep my name? Lydia Hale? Caleb hadn't thought about that. You want to? It's the last thing they gave me, my parents. I don't want to lose it. Then you keep it, or maybe... An idea occurred to him. Maybe you could be Lydia Hale Rowe. Keep your history, add our future. Lydia tested the sound of it silently, her lips moving. Then she nodded, decisive. Lydia Hale Rowe, I like that. It sounds like someone who belongs somewhere. You do belong somewhere, right here. I know. And from the way she said it, clear and certain and true, Caleb knew she finally believed it. After she left, he sat in the kitchen for another hour, drinking cold tea and watching the snow. Dutch had been right. He'd already taken the step. Everything else was just making it official. The scared part of him, the part that wanted to run, was still there. Probably always would be. But it was quieter now, drowned out by something stronger. Something that sounded a lot like hope. Outside, the wind howled and the temperature dropped. Inside, the stove stayed warm. And for the first time in 2 years, Caleb Rowe thought about a future that extended beyond the next town, the next job, the next escape. He thought about spring, about planting, about watching a girl grow into a woman, about staying. And it didn't scare him nearly as much as he thought it would. Spring came late to the valley that year, the snow holding on through March before finally surrendering to mud and emerging grass. By the time the roads were passable enough for the trip to Prescott, Lydia had been at the Triple Bar for 5 months. She'd grown 2 inches, her dresses letting out twice by Rosa's patient hands. Her face had filled out, lost that gaunt, desperate look, though her eyes still carried that old soul awareness that came from surviving things children shouldn't survive. Caleb made the arrangements with Dutch. 3 days off, permission to borrow a wagon since the roads were still rough. The foreman didn't ask questions, just nodded and told them to be careful. Rosa packed enough food for a week, fussing over Lydia like a mother hen. You make sure that lawyer does right by you, she told the girl, straightening her collar for the 3rd time. Don't let him rush you through the papers. Read everything careful. I will, Rosa. I promise. And you... She turned to Caleb, her dark eyes fierce. You're doing a good thing. Don't let anyone tell you different. Yes, ma'am. They left at first light, the wagon creaking over ruts and rocks, the team of horses picking their way through the mud with resigned patience. Lydia sat beside Caleb on the bench seat, wrapped in a coat Rosa had altered to fit her, watching the landscape roll by with quiet attention. She'd been subdued since they'd set out, not frightened exactly, but thoughtful in a way that made Caleb glance at her every few minutes. You all right? He asked finally, when they'd been traveling for 2 hours. Just thinking. About? What happens if they say no? The lawyer, the judge, whoever decides these things. What if they think you're not suitable? Then we figure something else out. But what if there isn't something else? What if they take me away? Her voice stayed level, but he could hear the fear underneath. What if this is just another thing I lose? Caleb pulled the horses to a stop. They were on a ridge overlooking the valley, pine trees dark against the pale sky, the morning sun just starting to burn off the mist. He turned to face Lydia fully. Listen to me. That's not going to happen. We're going to walk into that lawyer's office. We're going to sign whatever papers need signing, and we're going to make this legal. And if for some reason it doesn't work the first time, we'll try again, and again, however long it takes. How do you know? Because I'm not giving up on you. Not ever. You understand? He put his hand on her shoulder, solid and real. You're mine now. Maybe not on paper yet, but in every way that matters. And I don't let go of what's mine. Lydia looked at him for a long moment, searching his face. Then she nodded, something settling in her expression. Okay. I believe you. Good. He picked up the reins again. Now, let's get to Prescott and make it official. They reached town by late afternoon. Prescott had grown since Caleb's last visit. New buildings going up, more people on the streets, that sense of a place expanding into its future. He found the lawyer's office on the second floor of a brick building near the courthouse. The name Harold Garrison, attorney at law, painted in gold letters on the frosted glass door. The office inside was cramped but organized, shelves lined with law books, a desk buried under neat stacks of papers. Garrison himself was a small man with wire-rimmed spectacles and ink-stained fingers. He looked up when they entered, his expression professionally neutral. Help you folks? Need to file adoption papers. Caleb kept his voice steady, matter of fact. For the girl, Garrison's eyes moved to Lydia, assessing. She your daughter currently? Not legally, that's what we're here to fix. I see. And the biological parents? Dead, Lydia said quietly. 2 years ago. Any other living relatives? No, sir. Just me and Caleb now. The lawyer pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and a pen. All right, then. Let's start with the basics. Full names, ages, current residence. The questions went on for an hour. Where had Lydia been living before? How did they meet? What were Caleb's means of support? Did he have references? A steady job? Had he ever been arrested, convicted of any crimes? Some of the questions felt invasive, others ridiculous, but Caleb answered them all truthfully while Lydia sat beside him, her hands folded in her lap, her back straight. Finally, Garrison set down his pen. The process takes about 3 months. I'll file the petition with the territorial court. They'll review it, might ask for an interview. If everything checks out, a judge signs the order, and it becomes legal. And if it doesn't check out, then the petition is denied and the child remains a ward of the territory, subject to placement by the court. He said it gently, but firmly. I'll be honest with you, Mr. Rowe. The territory prefers to place orphans with established families, married couples preferably. A single man with no fixed address and a history of drifting, that's not ideal. I've got a job now. At the Triple Bar Ranch. Been there 5 months planning to stay. That helps. Can you provide a letter of reference from your employer? I can get one. Good. I'll also need character references, 2 at minimum. People who can attest to your moral fitness and ability to provide proper care. Caleb thought about Dutch and Rosa, about the other ranch hands who'd watched him work through the winter. I can get those too. Then we have a reasonable chance. Garrison looked at Lydia. Young lady, I need to ask you something directly. Is this what you want? Do you want Mr. Rowe to adopt you? Yes, sir. Nobody's forcing you? Threatening you? No, sir, I want this. She paused, choosing her words carefully. He's the only family I have left. The only family I want. Something in Garrison's expression softened. All right, then. I'll prepare the papers. Come back tomorrow afternoon, and we'll get everything signed and notarized. That'll be $10 for the filing fee and my services. Caleb pulled out the money, most of his savings from 5 months of work, and counted it onto the desk. Garrison wrote out a receipt, his pen scratching across the paper with practiced efficiency. One more thing, the lawyer said as they stood to leave. The court will want to see that the child is being properly educated. Can she read and write? I'm learning, Lydia said. Caleb's been teaching me, and Mrs. Keller at the ranch. Good. Keep that up. Education matters to judges. Garrison stood and offered his hand, first to Caleb, then to Lydia. I think you folks have a solid case. Try not to worry too much. Outside, the afternoon sun was warm on their faces. Caleb felt something loosen in his chest, not relief exactly, but a lessening of tension. It wasn't done yet, but they'd taken the first step. Made it real. You hungry? He asked Lydia. Starving. They found a restaurant, a real one with tablecloths and menus, nothing fancy but clean and respectable. Caleb ordered steak for both of them, potatoes, green beans, pie for dessert. It was more than he'd usually spend, but this felt like a moment worth marking. While they waited for the food, Lydia looked around the room with unconcealed curiosity. A family sat 3 tables over, parents and 2 children, the mother cutting meat for the youngest. An old couple by the window ate in comfortable silence. A group of miners at the bar laughed loud over their drinks. What are you thinking? Caleb asked. That we're like them now. A family having dinner. Normal. She said the word like it was foreign, something she hadn't believed could apply to her. Is that what we are? Normal? Don't know if I'd go that far, but we're getting there. I like it, getting there, I mean. She smiled, quick and genuine. It feels good, like building something instead of just surviving. The food came, and they ate slowly, savoring it. Caleb watched Lydia tackle her steak with determination, cutting careful pieces, chewing thoroughly. Rosa had taught her table manners, and the lessons had stuck. She looked like she belonged in this restaurant, in this town, in this life they were building. After dinner, they found a boarding house, cheaper than Mrs. Garrett's place in Cedar Bluff, but clean enough. 2 rooms again, side by side. The landlady, a tired-looking woman named Mrs. Chen, asked no questions beyond whether they wanted breakfast included. That night, Caleb lay in his narrow bed, listening to the sounds of the boarding house settling, footsteps overhead, a door closing down the hall, someone coughing. Tomorrow they'd sign the papers. In 3 months, if everything went right, Lydia would legally be his daughter. Lydia Hale Rowe. The responsibility of it hit him suddenly, heavy and real. He'd be responsible for another human being's entire life, her education, her future, her happiness. If he failed, if he messed this up, it wouldn't just hurt him, it would destroy her. The old instinct to run flickered in his chest. He could leave tonight. Leave money for Lydia, a note explaining he wasn't strong enough, let her go back to the ranch where Rosa and Dutch would take care of her properly. She'd be hurt, sure, but she'd recover. Kids were resilient, except he knew that was a lie. He'd seen her face when she talked about her parents disappearing, about not knowing. He'd heard her ask if he'd be there when she woke up, if this was real, if it would last. Walking away now wouldn't free her. It would break something in her that might never heal, and it would break something in him too. Caleb got out of bed, pulled on his pants and shirt, and walked out into the hallway. He stood outside Lydia's door for a long moment, just listening. He could hear her breathing, slow and even, asleep or close to it. He almost knocked, almost went in to make sure she was all right, to reassure himself that she was real and safe and still there. But that would wake her, worry her, make her think something was wrong. So instead, he just stood there for another minute, then went back to his room and lay down again. This time, when sleep came, it came easier. The next morning, they returned to Garrison's office. The lawyer had the papers ready, spread across his desk in neat stacks. He walked them through each document, explaining the legal language, pointing out where they needed to sign. This is the petition for adoption, he said, indicating the top page. It states your intention to adopt Lydia Hale as your legal daughter, with all rights and responsibilities that entails. Once you sign this, there's no backing out. You understand? I understand, Caleb said. And you, Miss Hale. This document states your consent to the adoption. Once you sign, Caleb Rowe becomes your legal guardian and parent. You understand? Yes, sir. All right, then. Garrison dipped his pen in ink and handed it to Caleb. Sign at the bottom. Caleb's hand was steadier than he expected. He wrote his name in the careful script his mother had taught him 30 years ago, the letters dark and permanent on the white paper. When he finished, Garrison blotted it and turned the document to Lydia. Your turn, Miss Hale. She took the pen, her small hand gripping it tight. For a moment she just looked at the paper, at the line where her signature would go. Then she glanced up at Caleb. This makes it real? This makes it real. She bent over the paper and signed, Lydia Hale, in careful letters that were still learning to be confident. Garrison witnessed both signatures, added his own, pressed his seal into hot wax at the bottom. There, it's filed. The court will process it over the next few months. Barring any complications, you should have the final order by summer. He stacked the papers and slid them into a leather folder. Congratulations. You're officially a family in waiting. They walked out of the office into bright morning sunshine. Lydia was quiet, but there was something different in the way she held herself, lighter, more settled. Caleb felt it too, like something heavy he'd been carrying had been set down, at least partially. What do we do now? Lydia asked. Now we go back to the ranch. Get those reference letters Garrison needs. Keep working, keep living, keep building. He looked down at her. And we wait. I'm good at waiting. I know you are. They picked up supplies before leaving town: fabric for Rosa, tobacco for Dutch, a new slate for Lydia since her old one had cracked. At the general store, while Caleb was settling the bill, Lydia wandered over to a display of books. When he found her, she was holding a slim volume, running her fingers over the embossed cover. "What's that?" "A book of stories. The clerk said it's about a girl who goes on adventures." She looked up at him hopefully. "Could we? If it's not too expensive?" Caleb checked the price, 50 cents. Half a day's wages. "You want it?" "Only if we can afford it." He thought about the money left in his pocket, what they'd need for the trip back, what he had saved at the ranch. Then he thought about a girl who'd spent 2 years surviving instead of living, who'd never asked for anything beyond a fair chance to work for her keep. "We can afford it," he said, and carried the book to the counter. Lydia clutched it the whole way back to the wagon, holding it like it was made of gold. That night, camped under a stand of cottonwoods, she read aloud by firelight, slowly, stumbling over some of the longer words, but determined. Caleb listened, watching the way her face lit up with the story, the way she forgot to be careful and just existed in the moment. This, he thought, this is what it's supposed to feel like. They reached the Triple Bar 2 days later, muddy and tired, but in good spirits. Rosa met them at the house, pulled Lydia into a fierce hug, and demanded to know how it went. When they told her about the papers, about the 3-month wait, her eyes went wet. "Thank the stars," she said. "That's wonderful news. Just wonderful." Dutch was more reserved when Caleb found him in the barn, but there was approval in his expression. "You did right. Now you just have to prove you mean it." "How do I do that?" "By staying. By showing up every day. By being the kind of man that girl deserves to have raising her." Dutch picked up a bridle that needed mending. "It's not complicated, Ro. It's just hard." Over the next weeks, Caleb got the reference letters Garrison had requested. Dutch wrote one, short and direct, attesting to Caleb's work ethic and character. Rosa wrote another, longer and more emotional, talking about how Lydia had thrived under their shared care. Even a few of the other ranch hands offered to write something, though Caleb declined. 2 strong letters were better than 5 mediocre ones. He sent everything to Garrison with a brief note asking about the status. The lawyer's response came 3 weeks later. The petition was under review. An interview had been scheduled for mid-June with a territorial judge. Both Caleb and Lydia would need to be present. June arrived with heat and grasshoppers, the valley turning golden under an endless sky. The work intensified, branding calves, moving herds to summer pasture, constant maintenance on equipment and buildings. Caleb worked 12-hour days, came back exhausted, fell into his bunk too tired to dream. But every evening, before sleep took him, he'd walk up to the big house and find Lydia. Sometimes she'd be in the kitchen helping Rosa. Sometimes she'd be in the yard playing with a litter of barn kittens someone had discovered. Sometimes she'd be on the porch reading her book for the 3rd or 4th time. They'd talk for a few minutes about her day, his day. Nothing important. Just touching base, making sure the connection held. Then he'd say goodnight, and she'd say it back. And he'd return to the bunkhouse feeling more settled than he had any right to feel. The interview date came faster than expected. They rode back to Prescott, this time in bright summer heat, dust rising from the wagon wheels in pale clouds. Garrison met them at the courthouse, looking nervous in a way he hadn't before. The judge is Harold Brisbane. He's fair but strict, doesn't like to waste time. Garrison adjusted his spectacles. Answer his questions directly. Don't embellish, don't get defensive. And for heaven's sake, let the girl speak for herself. Brisbane values hearing from the children. The courtroom was smaller than Caleb expected. Just a simple room with benches and a raised platform where Judge Brisbane sat behind a scarred wooden desk. He was an older man, thin as wire, with eyes that had seen too much of humanity's worst and had stopped being surprised by it. "Mr. Rowe, Miss Hale, please approach." They stood before the desk, Lydia between Caleb and Garrison. Brisbane shuffled through papers, reading in silence for what felt like an hour. Finally, he looked up. "Mr. Rowe, you've petitioned to adopt this child. Explain to me why." Caleb had prepared for this question, rehearsed answers in his head. But standing there under Brisbane's sharp gaze, all the practiced words evaporated. So he just told the truth. "Because she needed someone. And because I needed her, though I didn't know it at the time. She was alone, surviving on nothing but determination and hope. I was alone, running from grief. We found each other, and now we're trying to build something that lasts. Brisbane's expression didn't change. You're not married. You have no permanent home beyond a ranch job that could end any season. You spent 2 years drifting before this. What makes you think you're fit to raise a child? Nothing makes me think that. I'm not fit. Not really. I'm still figuring it out. Caleb met the judge's eyes directly. But I'm trying. Every day I'm trying. And she makes me want to be better than I am. That's got to count for something. Wanting isn't enough. Children need stability, structure, a parent who won't run when things get hard. I know. And I'm not running. Not anymore. Brisbane turned to Lydia. Miss Hale, is this what you want? Truly? Yes, sir. Why? Lydia took a breath, and when she spoke, her voice was clear and strong. Because he came back. When I was alone in Cedar Bluff, living in alleys and wondering if I'd make it through another winter, he showed up. He bought me dinner, gave me a warm place to sleep. Then he left, and I thought that was it. Another person passing through. She paused. But he came back. 6 weeks later, he came back because he'd promised to help me look for my parents. And when we found out they were really gone, he didn't leave me to deal with it alone. He asked me to come with him, to be part of something. And he's kept every promise since. People can keep promises for a while. That doesn't mean they'll keep them forever. Maybe not. But I trust him anyway. Because trust is a choice, and I choose him. He's not perfect, but he's mine. And I'm his. That's what family is, choosing each other and not giving up. The courtroom was silent. Brisbane stared at Lydia for a long moment, and Caleb could see the judge reassessing, reconsidering. Finally, Brisbane looked at Garrison. The references are strong. The work history is recent but steady. The child is clearly well cared for and thriving. He turned back to Caleb. I'm going to approve this petition, but understand, I'll be checking in. 6 months from now, a year from now. If I find out you've abandoned this child, mistreated her, failed her in any way, I will revoke this adoption and you'll never have another chance. Are we clear? Crystal clear, Your Honor. Good. Brisbane signed something with a flourish, pressed his seal to it. As of this moment, Lydia Hale is legally Lydia Hale Rowe, and you are legally her father. May you both take this responsibility seriously. Garrison was beaming. Congratulations, you're a family. Caleb looked down at Lydia. She was staring at him with those gray eyes, shining with tears she wouldn't let fall, a smile breaking across her face like sunrise. He wanted to say something profound, something that would capture the enormity of this moment. Instead, he just said, "Let's go home." And she said, "Yes, let's." They walked out of the courthouse together, past the crowds and the noise, into the bright afternoon. Somewhere behind them, Garrison was handling the paperwork, making sure everything was filed properly. But Caleb barely heard him. All he could focus on was Lydia's hand in his, small and strong and real. "You know what this means?" she said as they reached the wagon. By the time she turned 13, she was nearly as tall as Rosa, with her mother's gray eyes and a determination that was entirely her own. She'd taken to the ranch work with an intensity that sometimes worried Caleb. She was always the first one up, always asking to help with the horses, always pushing herself harder than necessary. Dutch said it was the mark of someone who'd learned too young that survival meant constant effort, that you didn't rest because rest meant weakness. "She'll learn to ease up," Rosa told Caleb one evening when he'd mentioned his concern. "Give her time. She's still proving to herself that this is real, that it won't disappear if she stops working for it. It's been 2 years. And she spent 2 years before that alone. That kind of fear doesn't vanish overnight." Rosa was kneading bread dough, her hands working with practiced efficiency. "You worry about her too much. She's strong. She'll find her way." But Caleb couldn't help worrying. He'd watch Lydia in the barn, talking to the horses in that soft, steady voice she used, and he'd see something in her expression, a guardedness, a holding back, like she was afraid to want too much. She worked hard, learned fast, never complained, but she also never quite relaxed, never fully believed that this life wouldn't be taken from her the way everything else had been. It was a visiting horse trader who changed things. His name was Marcus Webb, an older black man who'd been moving horses through the territory for 30 years. He showed up at the Triple Bar one hot July afternoon with a string of 6 animals looking to sell. Dutch went out to inspect them with Caleb and Lydia trailing behind. The horses were good quality, well-trained, healthy, priced fairly. Dutch was examining a gray mare when Webb noticed Lydia standing near a young bay gelding, her hand extended but not quite touching. "That one's got a story," Webb said, walking over. "Found him half-starved on the Kansas plains, abandoned when his owner died. Took me 3 weeks to get him to trust me enough to take food from my hand." Lydia looked up at the trader. "But he's gentle now." "Gentle enough. Still spooks easy, though. Probably always will. Some things, once you learn them, you can't unlearn." Webb studied the girl with shrewd eyes. "You know horses?" "Some. I've been learning." "She's got a gift," Caleb said, coming to stand beside her. "Animals trust her." Webb nodded slowly. "That's a rare thing. Most people, they think trust is about dominance, about making an animal submit. But real trust, that's about understanding, about knowing when to push and when to wait." He looked at Lydia. "You want to try working with him? The bay?" "Me?" "You, if your father agrees." Caleb saw the way Lydia's eyes had lit up, the way she was already reaching toward the horse even as she held herself back. "I agree, if Dutch doesn't mind." Dutch shrugged. "Webb's horses are always solid. If he thinks the girl can handle it, I trust his judgment." They bought the bay gelding for $40, and Webb spent 2 hours that afternoon showing Lydia how to approach him, how to read his body language, how to move slowly and speak softly, and never corner him when he was frightened. Caleb watched from the fence rail as his daughter, still strange and wonderful to think it, stood in the corral with 1,000 pounds of nervous horse, her voice steady and her movements careful. "She's a natural," Webb said, leaning against the rail beside Caleb. "Seen a lot of people work with horses over the years. Most of them are just competent. But that girl there, she understands them, understands what it's like to be afraid and needs someone to prove you're safe. She's been through a lot. I figured as much. Got that look in her eyes, old before her time." Webb pulled out a pipe and lit it, the sweet smoke drifting in the still air. "You her real father?" "I'm her real father, just not her first one." "Adopted?" 2 years ago. She was an orphan. I was lost, I guess. We found each other." Webb nodded, watching Lydia coax the bay to take an apple from her flat palm. "Sometimes that's how families work. Not blood, but choice. Not perfect, but real." He glanced at Caleb. "You did good, taking her in. Not many men would." "She's the one who did good. She saved me more than I saved her." "That's usually how it goes." Over the next months, Lydia worked with the bay gelding every day. She named him Ash, for the color of his coat when the light hit it right. Slowly, patiently, she taught him to trust again, to let her approach without flinching, to accept the saddle without panic, to carry a rider without fear. By autumn, he was following her around the corral like a dog, nickering whenever she appeared. Dutch noticed the change in her, too. "The girl's got confidence now. You see it? The way she carries herself." Caleb had seen it. The guardedness was still there, but softer now, tempered by something that looked like peace. She smiled more readily, laughed at the other ranch hand's jokes, let herself be a child sometimes instead of a survivor constantly braced for the next blow. When winter came again, their third at the Triple Bar, things felt settled in a way Caleb had stopped believing possible. He'd been promoted to head wrangler, which meant better pay and a small cabin near the barn instead of the bunkhouse. It was just 2 rooms, but it was theirs. Private. Home. Lydia helped him move their few belongings, hanging curtains Rosa had sewn, arranging the simple furniture Dutch had helped them build. When everything was in place, she stood in the middle of the main room and turned in a slow circle, taking it in. "This is ours?" she asked. "Really ours?" "Really ours." "For how long?" "As long as we want it." She was quiet for a moment, and Caleb could see her processing this, trying to make herself believe it. Finally, she nodded. "Okay, then I want it forever." "Then that's how long we'll stay." That winter was hard. Snow came early and stayed late, temperatures dropping so low that water froze in buckets within minutes of being drawn from the well. The work was brutal, the days short and dark. But the cabin stayed warm. They ate dinner together every night at the small table, Lydia reading aloud from books Rosa lent them while Caleb mended tack or sharpened tools. Sometimes they didn't talk at all, just existed in comfortable silence, the kind that only came with people who knew each other deeply. One February evening, a blizzard hit with such force that Dutch called everyone into the main house rather than risk them trying to reach their bunks. They crowded into the big living room, 15 ranch hands, Caleb and Lydia, Dutch and Rosa, waiting out the storm while wind howled against the walls and snow piled against the windows. Someone produced a fiddle. Someone else had a harmonica. Before long, there was music, rough and cheerful, and a few of the hands were dancing, stomping their boots on the wood floor. Rosa pulled Dutch into something resembling a waltz, both of them laughing when they stumbled. Caleb sat near the fire, watching Lydia watch the others. She had that expression again, the one that said she was observing life instead of living it, holding herself apart. "You should dance," he said. She looked at him, startled. "I don't know how. Neither do half the people out there. Doesn't seem to be stopping them." "I just embarrass myself." Caleb stood up and held out his hand. "Then we'll embarrass ourselves together. Come on." For a moment he thought she'd refuse. Then she took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. They joined the others, Caleb showing her the basic steps, both of them laughing when she stepped on his toes or he turned the wrong direction. She was awkward and self-conscious at first, but gradually she relaxed into it, letting the music carry her, letting herself be 14 and clumsy and happy. When the song ended, she was breathless and grinning. "That was fun." "Yeah, it was." "Can we do it again?" "As many times as you want." They danced through 3 more songs until Lydia was pink-cheeked and tired. When she finally collapsed into a chair, still smiling, Rosa brought her cider and squeezed her shoulder in passing. "Good to see you having fun, mija," the older woman said softly. Later, when the storm had passed and they were walking back to the cabin through knee-deep snow, Lydia said, "Thank you for making me dance." "You're welcome. I think I forget sometimes that it's okay to enjoy things, that nothing bad will happen if I let my guard down." Caleb stopped walking and turned to face her. The moon was bright on the snow, turning everything silver and blue. "Nothing bad is going to happen. Not to you, not while I'm around. You understand?" "You can't promise that." "No, but I can promise I'll do everything in my power to keep you safe, to give you a life where you can dance and laugh and not be afraid all the time." He put his hands on her shoulders. "I know what it's like to lose people, to be scared of caring because caring means you can get hurt. But Lydia, you can't live like that forever. At some point you have to decide that the good is worth the risk of the bad." She looked up at him, and in the moonlight she looked older than 14, older than she should have to be. "Have you decided that? Is it worth it?" "Every single day." Something shifted in her expression, a crack in the wall she'd built around herself, light getting in. "Then I'll try. To let myself be happy, I mean. To trust that this is real. That's all I'm asking." They finished the walk in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than before. Lighter. More hopeful. Spring brought changes. Dutch announced that he and Rosa were getting too old for ranch work, that they were thinking about selling the Triple Bar and retiring to Santa Fe where Rosa had family. The news hit like a punch to the gut. This place had been home for nearly 3 years, the longest Caleb had stayed anywhere since Mary and Samuel died. "What happens to us?" Lydia asked when Caleb told her. Her voice was carefully controlled, but he could hear the fear underneath. "We figure it out, same as always." "But where will we go?" "I don't know yet. We've got time. Dutch said the sale wouldn't happen until fall at earliest, and whoever buys the place might want to keep the current crew." But when the buyer finally came through in September, it was clear that wasn't going to happen. The new owner was bringing his own men, his own systems. Everyone was being let go with 2 months' severance pay and good recommendations. Caleb sat in the cabin that night, doing calculations on a piece of paper while Lydia watched from across the table. They had money saved, 3 years of steady wages, minus living expenses. Enough to get by for a few months, maybe longer if they were careful. But then what? We could go back to drifting, Lydia said quietly. Find work where we can. Keep moving. Is that what you want? No, but if it's all we have, it's not all we have. Caleb set down his pencil. Dutch told me there's a ranch for sale about 40 miles north. Smaller operation, nothing fancy, but solid. Good grazing land, decent house and barn. Owner died. Family wants to unload it quick. Lydia's eyes went wide. You're thinking about buying it? Thinking about it. We've got enough for a down payment, and the bank in Prescott handles mortgages. It would be tight for a few years, and we'd have to work twice as hard as we do now. But it would be ours, really ours. Our own ranch? Our own ranch. She stared at him, and he could see the war happening behind her eyes. Hope fighting with fear, the desperate desire to believe battling against years of learned caution. Finally, she said, "What if we fail? What if we can't make it work? Then we fail. But at least we'll fail trying for something we chose instead of something someone else handed us." He reached across the table and took her hand. "I'm tired of being careful, Lydia. I'm tired of playing it safe. I want to build something that's ours. Do you?" The answer took a long time coming, but when it did, it was sure. "Yes. Yes, I do." They rode out to see the property the next day. It was everything Dutch had described, 200 acres of good grazing land, a house that needed work but had solid bones, a barn that would hold a dozen horses. There was even a creek running through the east pasture, reliable water year-round. Lydia walked through every building, examined every fence line, checked every corner and shadow. When she finally came back to where Caleb stood by the corral, her face was flushed and her eyes were bright. "It's perfect," she said. "It needs work, but it's perfect." "You think we can make it work?" "I think we can do anything if we do it together." The paperwork took a month. The bank wanted references, proof of income, a detailed business plan. Caleb spent hours with a pencil and paper, calculating costs and projected revenues, figuring out how many cattle they could support, what they'd need for equipment and supplies. Lydia helped, her head for numbers better than his, her projections more realistic. When the bank finally approved the mortgage, Caleb signed the papers with a hand that shook only slightly. This was commitment on a scale he'd never imagined. 20 years of payments, 20 years of staying in one place, 20 years of building instead of running. He looked at Lydia, who'd insisted on being there for the signing. She was 15 now, tall and strong and capable, her gray eyes steady on his. "Last chance to back out," he said. "Not a chance." They moved in 3 weeks before Christmas. The weather had turned cold, but not impossible, and half the Triple Bar crew showed up to help them move their belongings and get settled. Dutch and Rosa came too, Rosa carrying a basket of food and a quilt she'd made specially. "This is for your new home," she said, pressing the quilt into Lydia's hands. "Every stitch made with love." Lydia hugged her, fierce and grateful. "I'll treasure it forever." "I know you will, mija." That first night in their own house, Caleb and Lydia sat at the kitchen table eating the food Rosa had packed: cold chicken, bread, cheese, dried apples. The house was drafty and the furniture was sparse, but it was theirs. They'd chosen it. They'd fought for it. "You scared?" Lydia asked. "Terrified," Caleb admitted. "You?" "Same. But it's a good kind of scared. The kind that means we're doing something that matters." Yeah, it is." They finished eating in comfortable silence, then went to their separate rooms. Caleb lay in bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the new house. Wind in the eaves, a shutter tapping somewhere, the creek running in the distance. He should have been anxious, should have been second-guessing this massive commitment. Instead, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, something that took him a moment to recognize. Hope. The first year on their own ranch was the hardest thing Caleb had ever done. They worked from before dawn until after dark, 7 days a week, doing everything themselves because they couldn't afford to hire help. They repaired fences, cleared brush, built new corrals, and a way to improve grazing by rotating pastures. I did not know that. We should try it, the pasture rotation, I mean. It would help the grass recover, give us better feed. All right, you research it, figure out how it works, and we'll give it a shot. She beamed at him, that rare unguarded smile that meant she was happy and excited and fully present. Those smiles came more often now, Caleb noticed. The guardedness was still there, but softer, like armor that was slowly being put aside. By the time spring came again, they'd made real progress. The cattle had multiplied to 10 head. The garden was producing. They'd repaired most of the major problems with the house and barn. They weren't prosperous, not by a long shot, but they were surviving. They were building. One warm April evening, Caleb found Lydia in the barn, sitting in Ash's stall with her back against the wall, reading by lamplight. The horse stood over her protectively, occasionally lowering his head to investigate what she was doing. "Getting late," Caleb said from the doorway. "I know, just wanted to finish this chapter." He came into the stall and sat down beside her. Ash snorted but didn't move, used to both of them by now. "What are you reading?" "A book about veterinary medicine. There's a whole section on treating colic in horses." She showed him the page, dense with text and diagrams. "It's fascinating. Did you know there are different types of colic, and they all require different treatments?" "Can't say I did." "I want to learn this. All of it. Everything there is to know about animal medicine." She looked at him, her expression serious. "There's a veterinary college in Fort Collins. It's new, but they're accepting students. I was thinking, maybe someday." Caleb felt something catch in his chest. "You want to be a veterinarian?" "I don't know if I could. I mean, I'm a girl, and there's probably rules about that. And it would cost money we don't have. And I'd have to leave the ranch for months at a time." She was talking faster now, listing objections before he could. "It's probably a stupid idea." "It's not stupid. It's ambitious. There's a difference." "But how old would you be when you finished?" 20, maybe 21, if I could even get in." Caleb thought about what that meant. 5 or 6 years of saving money, working toward a goal, planning for a future that extended beyond just surviving. 5 or 6 years of Lydia growing up, becoming her own person, choosing her own path. 5 or 6 years of being her father. "Then we work toward it," he said. "We save what we can. You study what you need to study. When the time comes, if you still want it, we'll make it happen." "You mean it?" "I mean it. You've got a gift, Lydia. You understand animals in a way most people never will. It would be a waste not to develop that." She threw her arms around him, the book falling forgotten into the straw. "Thank you. Thank you for believing in me." Caleb held her tight, this girl who'd been a stranger singing to a dying dog, who'd become his daughter, who was becoming a woman with dreams bigger than the territory they lived in. "I'll always believe in you. That's what fathers do." When she pulled back, her eyes were wet, but her smile was radiant. "I'm going to make you proud. I swear it. You already do, every single day." They sat in the stall for another hour, talking about colleges and tuition, and how they'd manage the ranch if she had to leave for months at a time, making plans, building dreams, believing in a future that suddenly seemed within reach. Outside, the stars came out one by one, the same stars that had watched over them in Cedar Bluff, in the mountains, at the Triple Bar, and now here, on their own land, constant and reliable, like the promise between them, to stay, to try, to build something that lasted. And for the first time since Mary and Samuel had died, Caleb Rowe let himself imagine more than just tomorrow. He let himself imagine years ahead, decades ahead, a whole life stretching out before them. He let himself imagine Lydia grown and educated and happy, doing work she loved, making a difference in the world. He let himself imagine being there to see it, and it didn't scare him anymore. The years moved like water over stones, steady and relentless, wearing away the rough edges until what remained was smooth and sure. Lydia turned 16, then 17, then 18, each year bringing changes that Caleb watched with a mixture of pride and bittersweet awareness that childhood was ending. She grew into her height, into her strength, into a confidence that made people take notice when she walked into a room. The ranch prospered slowly, the kind of success built on backbreaking work and careful decisions. Their herd grew to 30 head of cattle. They acquired 8 horses, including 2 mares that Lydia trained for riding and breeding. The garden expanded until they were selling vegetables in town along with their beef. They hired a hand for the busiest seasons, a quiet young man named Thomas who worked hard and asked no questions about the tall young woman who seemed to know more about horses than anyone he'd ever met. Through it all, Lydia studied. She read every veterinary text she could borrow or buy, practiced on their own animals, apprenticed with the traveling veterinarian who passed through twice a year. By the time she was 19, she was treating neighbors' livestock with a skill that had people driving 20 miles to seek her advice. "You could stay here," Caleb said one evening in late summer, the year she turned 20. They were sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. "Build a practice. You don't need the formal education. You've already got the knowledge and the skill." Lydia was quiet for a long moment, her fingers playing with the fringe on her shawl. "I could, and maybe I would have, 5 years ago. But I don't want to wonder anymore. I don't want to look back when I'm 40 and think about what I might have done if I'd been brave enough to try." "You've always been brave. Only because you taught me to be." She looked at him, and in the fading light, her eyes were the same gray they'd been when she was 11 years old, singing to a dying dog. "You took a chance on me when everyone else would have walked away. You believed I could be more than just a survivor. Now I need to see if you were right." The application to the veterinary college in Fort Collins went out in September. The acceptance letter came in December, along with a list of required supplies and a tuition bill that made Caleb's stomach clench. They'd been saving for years, but it still wasn't quite enough. "We'll figure it out," he told Lydia when she saw his face. "I can sell some cattle. Maybe take out a small loan. You can't sell the breeding stock. We need them. We need you to go to school more than we need cattle. But no buts. This is happening. You're going." They spent the winter preparing, selling what they could spare, arranging for Thomas to stay on full time to help Caleb run the ranch, packing Lydia's trunk with everything she'd need for a year away from home. Rosa came to visit in February, older and slower now, but still sharp-eyed and loving. She helped Lydia sew new dresses, practical ones suitable for a young woman attending college. "Your mother would be proud," Rosa said one afternoon, her needle flashing through fabric. "Both your mothers. The one who gave you life and the one who taught you to survive." Lydia's hands stilled on the dress she was hemming. "Sometimes I can barely remember them. My first parents, I mean. Just flashes, my mother's laugh, my father's hands. It makes me feel guilty." "Memory fades, that's natural, but love doesn't fade. The love they gave you, that you carry forward, that's what matters." Rosa tied off her thread and looked at Lydia directly. "And the love you found after, that's real too. Different, but just as real." "I know. Caleb saved my life." "You saved his too. Don't forget that part." March arrived cold and bright, and suddenly it was time. Caleb drove Lydia to the train station in Prescott, the wagon loaded with her trunk and supplies. The platform was crowded with people saying goodbyes, families, couples, friends. Caleb and Lydia stood apart from them, both struggling with words that seemed too small for what they were feeling. "You have enough money?" Caleb asked for the third time. "I have enough. And you'll write? Let me know how it's going. Every week, I promise. And if you need anything..." "Caleb..." She took his hands, squeezed them. "I'll be fine. I'm ready for this." "I know you are. Doesn't make it easier to watch you go." The train whistle blew, sharp and insistent. People began moving toward the cars, gathering bags and children. Lydia picked up her small travel case, but she didn't move toward the train. "What if I fail?" she said suddenly, the words tumbling out. "What if I'm not smart enough, or they don't take me seriously because I'm a woman, or I can't handle being away from home?" Caleb cupped her face in his hands, making her look at him. "Then you come home and we figure out what's next." "But you won't fail, Lydia. You're the strongest person I know. You survived things that would have destroyed most people. You turned loneliness into determination, fear into courage, loss into love. A year of school isn't going to break you." "You really believe that?" "With every fiber of my being." She hugged him then, fierce and sudden, her face pressed against his shoulder. "Thank you. For everything. For coming back. For staying. For believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself." "You don't have to thank me for that. It's been the privilege of my life." The conductor called final boarding. Lydia pulled back, picked up her case, and walked toward the train. At the step, she turned back once, waved, then disappeared inside. Caleb stood on the platform until the train pulled away, until it was just a dark shape growing smaller against the horizon, until it vanished completely. Then he climbed into the wagon and drove home to a ranch that suddenly felt enormous and empty. The first weeks were the hardest. Caleb threw himself into work, rising before dawn and working until exhaustion forced him to stop. Thomas tried to help, tried to make conversation, but Caleb wasn't ready for company. He ate meals standing up, slept fitfully, moved through the days like a man underwater. Lydia's first letter arrived 3 weeks after she left. Caleb sat at the kitchen table and read it slowly, savoring every word. She wrote about the train journey, the campus, her small room in the women's dormitory. She wrote about her classes, anatomy, physiology, pharmacology, and how demanding they were, how much she had to study. She wrote about the other students, mostly men who stared at her like she was a curiosity, and the few other women who'd banded together for mutual support. She wrote about being homesick, about missing the ranch and Ash and the sound of the creek at night. But she also wrote about being excited, about learning things that made her see the world differently, about feeling like she was becoming the person she was meant to be. At the end, she wrote, "I know this is hard on you, being alone, but please know that I think about you every day. You gave me wings, Caleb. Now I'm learning to fly. I love you. Always. Lydia." Caleb folded the letter carefully and put it in his pocket. He carried it with him for days, reading it whenever the loneliness got too heavy. Spring turned to summer. The letters kept coming, regular as clockwork, and slowly Caleb adjusted to the new rhythm of life. He and Thomas developed an easy working relationship. The ranch continued to prosper. In July, they had their best cattle sale yet, enough to cover Lydia's next year of tuition with money left over. Caleb wrote back to every letter, his responses shorter than hers, but just as heartfelt. He told her about the ranch, about the new foal one of the mares had delivered, about the barn cat that had adopted him. He told her he was proud of her. He told her he missed her. He never told her how quiet the house was at night, or how he sometimes set the table for two out of habit before remembering she wasn't there. Some things didn't need to be said. Summer faded into fall. Lydia's letters grew longer, more detailed, filled with complex medical terminology and descriptions of procedures she was learning. She wrote about delivering a calf by cesarean section under her professor's supervision, about diagnosing and treating a horse with colic, about the thrill of understanding how bodies worked and how to heal them. "I'm good at this," she wrote in October. "Really good. Professor Hendricks says I have natural instincts that can't be taught. He's encouraging me to consider staying for advanced training after graduation. There are opportunities here, Caleb, real opportunities." Caleb read that letter 3 times, feeling something complicated twist in his chest. Pride, absolutely, joy at her success. But also fear, the old familiar fear that people left, that nothing good lasted, that he was always going to end up alone. He wrote back congratulating her, encouraging her to pursue every opportunity. He didn't mention the fear. That was his burden to carry, not hers. Winter came hard and fast. A bad storm in December damaged part of the barn roof, and Caleb spent 2 days in freezing temperatures making repairs. He developed a cough that wouldn't quit, that left him breathless and exhausted. Thomas wanted to call the doctor, but Caleb refused. It was just a cold. It would pass. It didn't pass. By January, he could barely get out of bed. Thomas finally rode to town and brought back Doc Morrison, who took one listen to Caleb's lungs and prescribed bed rest and medicine. "It's pneumonia," the doctor said bluntly. "You push yourself much harder, and it'll kill you. You need to rest, let your body heal. I've got a ranch to run. You've got a hired hand who's perfectly capable of running things for a few weeks. Let him." Thomas proved more capable than Caleb had given him credit for. He managed the daily operations, made decisions when necessary, even wrote to Lydia to let her know what was happening. Her response came fast, a telegram instead of a letter. "Coming home. Don't argue. Be there in 3 days." Caleb tried to send a telegram back telling her to stay, that he was fine, that she couldn't miss school, but Thomas refused to take it to town. "She's coming," the young man said firmly. "You do the same for her. Let her do this for you." Lydia arrived on a cold January afternoon, bursting through the front door with her medical bag and an expression of fierce determination. She took one look at Caleb, pale and thin, sitting in a chair by the fire because lying down made the coughing worse, and her eyes went bright with tears she refused to let fall. "You look terrible," she said. "Nice to see you too." She crossed the room and put her hand on his forehead, checking for fever with the professional competence she'd learned at school. "When did this start?" December sometime. And you didn't think to write me? Didn't want to worry you. Well, I'm worried now. She opened her bag and started pulling out supplies, a stethoscope, bottles of medicine, clean bandages. I'm going to examine you and you're going to let me. No arguments. Caleb submitted to the examination, watching his daughter work with a skill that took his breath away. She listened to his lungs, checked his pulse, asked questions about his symptoms with the same calm authority Doc Morrison had used. When she was done, she sat back and met his eyes. It's pneumonia, but it's improving. You're past the worst of it, but you need to keep resting, keep taking the medicine, and for heaven's sake, stop trying to work. Her voice cracked slightly. You scared me. When Thomas's letter came, I thought... She stopped, swallowed hard. I thought I might lose you. I'm all right. You're not all right, but you will be. Because I'm staying until you are. You can't stay. School will wait. You won't. She grabbed his hand, held it tight. You came back for me when I was alone. You think I'm going to leave you now? Over the next weeks, Lydia nursed Caleb back to health with a combination of medical knowledge and sheer stubborn will. She made him eat even when he had no appetite. She forced him to rest even when he insisted he could work. She sat with him on bad nights when the coughing got worse, her hand on his shoulder, her presence steady and sure. And slowly, he healed. By March, he was back on his feet, still weak but recovering. Lydia had missed an entire semester of school, but she seemed unconcerned. She'd spent her time studying from the textbooks she'd brought home, practicing her skills on the ranch animals, learning in her own way. I wrote to Professor Hendricks, she told Caleb one evening, explained the situation. He said I can make up the work over the summer and continue in the fall. Good, that's good. Or, she paused, choosing her words carefully, or I could stay. The traveling veterinarian is retiring. He asked if I'd be interested in taking over his route. It wouldn't be the same as finishing school, but I'd be practicing medicine, helping people, making a difference. Caleb looked at her, this woman who'd been a frightened child, who'd grown into someone strong and capable and full of purpose. What do you want? Honestly, I don't know. Part of me wants to go back, finish what I started. Part of me wants to stay here, build a practice, be close to home. She smiled slightly. Being away made me realize how much I love this place, how much I love the life we've built. But I also love learning, love pushing myself, love the idea of becoming the best veterinarian I can be. Then go back, finish school. The ranch will be here when you're done. I'll be here when you're done. You promise? I promise. She left again in April, this time with less fanfare but more certainty. Caleb drove her to the station, watched her board the train, waved as it pulled away. This time the loneliness was easier to bear. He knew she'd be back. Maybe not immediately, maybe not for years, but eventually. Because they were family, and family found its way home. The letters continued through that spring and summer. Lydia made up her missed work and returned to her regular studies. Her letters were full of enthusiasm again, full of plans and dreams and possibilities. She graduated in May of the following year at the top of her class, the only woman to receive honors. Caleb traveled to Fort Collins for the ceremony, his first time off the ranch in over a year. He sat in the audience and watched Lydia walk across the stage in her graduation robes, watched her accept her diploma with a smile that could have lit the whole territory. When it was over, she found him in the crowd and hugged him so tight he couldn't breathe. I did it, she said. I actually did it. I never doubted you would. Yes, you did, sometimes. But you believed in me anyway. That's what mattered. That night at dinner, Lydia told him about a job offer she'd received, a position at a prestigious practice in Denver, good pay, opportunities for advancement. It's everything I thought I wanted, she said. But it doesn't feel right. What does feel right? She looked at him across the table, and her eyes were clear and sure. Coming home, building a clinic near the ranch, serving the community that raised me, being close to you. You can't make that decision based on me. You need to choose what's best for your future. You are my future, Caleb. You and the ranch and the life we built together. That's not settling, that's choosing what matters most. She reached across and took his hand. I don't need prestige or big city success. I need purpose. I need family. I need home. And that's what you gave me. That's what I want to give back." They returned to the ranch together 3 days later. Lydia spent the summer building her clinic, a small structure near the house, equipped with everything she needed for basic veterinary care. Word spread quickly that Dr. Lydia Hale Rowe had returned, and within weeks she had more work than she could handle. Ranchers drove hours to have her treat their animals. She delivered foals and calves, treated injuries and illnesses, earned a reputation for skill and compassion. And every evening, she came home to the ranch she'd helped build, to the father who'd given her a second chance at life. 5 years passed in what felt like moments. The ranch prospered. Lydia's practice grew until she had to hire an assistant. Caleb, now in his 50s, slowed down some, but was still strong, still capable, still the man who'd ridden into Cedar Bluff all those years ago, looking for nothing more than a place to sleep. One autumn evening, they sat on the porch watching the sunset, the same sunset they'd watched 100 times, 1,000 times, each one different and each one beautiful. Caleb was whittling a piece of wood, his hands steady and sure. Lydia was reading a veterinary journal, occasionally sharing interesting articles. "Did you ever think we'd end up here?" she asked suddenly, setting down her journal. "When you came back to Cedar Bluff that day, did you imagine this?" Caleb thought about it, about the broken man he'd been, running from grief and ghosts, about the frightened girl singing to a dying dog, about all the choices and chances and moments that had brought them to this porch, this sunset, this life. "No," he said honestly, "I didn't think I'd end up anywhere. I thought I'd just keep running until I ran out of territory." "What changed?" "You changed. You showed me that some things are worth staying for, worth fighting for, worth building." He set down his knife and wood, turned to look at her. "I came back to Cedar Bluff thinking I was saving you, but you saved me. You gave me a reason to stop running, a reason to believe in tomorrow." Lydia's eyes were bright in the fading light. "You know what the best part is? We saved each other. That's how it works. Real family doesn't rescue, it partners. We chose each other, and we kept choosing each other, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. Yeah, especially then." The sun dropped below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and deep blue. Somewhere in the barn, a horse nickered. The creek ran on, eternal and patient. Inside the house, dinner waited on the stove. "I got offered a position at a veterinary college," Lydia said quietly. "In California. They want me to teach, help train the next generation. It's a huge opportunity." Caleb felt that old fear spike through him, but he pushed it down. "What did you say?" "I said I'd think about it, but I already know the answer." She smiled at him. "I'm not going anywhere. This is home, your home. And I finally understand what you tried to tell me all those years ago, that sometimes the greatest adventure isn't about going somewhere new. It's about building something that lasts right where you are." "You're sure?" "Because if you want to go, I'm sure. More sure than I've ever been about anything." She stood up, stretched. "Now come on. Dinner's getting cold, and I'm starving." She went inside, and after a moment, Caleb followed. The house was warm and bright, filled with the smell of Rose's chicken recipe that Lydia had finally mastered. They ate at the kitchen table, talking about the day's work and tomorrow's plans, making the small talk that filled the spaces between the important things. Later, after the dishes were washed and put away, after Lydia had gone to check on a patient and returned tired but satisfied, after the lamps were lit and the fire banked for the night, Caleb stood at his window looking out at the land they'd built together. He thought about Mary and Samuel, about the family he'd lost and the years he'd spent running from that loss. The pain was still there, would always be there, but it was different now. Softer. Integrated into who he was instead of controlling everything he did. He thought about a girl singing to a dying dog, about the moment he'd almost ridden past, about the choice to come back that had changed everything. He thought about all the small moments that had added up to this life. The adoption papers, the first winter at the Triple Bar, the day they'd bought this ranch, Lydia's graduation, 1,000 ordinary evenings on the porch, watching the sunset. And he understood, finally, what he'd been searching for all those years he'd been drifting. Not redemption, not escape, not even healing exactly. Purpose, connection, love, family. He'd found it in the most unlikely place, in the most unlikely way. A broken man and a lost child, choosing each other over and over again until the choice became permanent, became real, became the foundation of everything that mattered. The little girl searching for her parents hadn't lost everything after all. She'd found exactly what she needed. And the man who thought his life was over had been given the greatest gift of all, a second chance at family, at love, at believing in tomorrow. Caleb turned away from the window, turned toward the warmth of the house and the life they'd built. In the next room, he could hear Lydia humming while she studied, the same tune she'd been singing all those years ago in Cedar Bluff. Not sad anymore, not lonely, just peaceful, content, home. He smiled, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, the restlessness was completely gone. He didn't want to run, didn't need to run. He had everything he needed right here. They'd both found their way home, and this time, neither of them was ever leaving.